The newsprint really was devoted to a lot of these appearances. Bisbee began to attract attention far beyond Minneapolis or St. Anthony, and namely in the National Universalist press, which began to denounce him.
We experienced a mingled sensation of amusement and disgust when we read the other day in one of the papers the statement that the Reverend Herman Bisbee, lecturing on the Bible, did not happen to have a specimen of that book present. But he did have a Brahmanical Bible at hand from which he read. Is this not an intimation that he knows more, or at least cares more for the latter than the former? And if so, why does he set himself up as a minister of the Christian Bible? Why not announce himself a Buddhist? If all Bibles and all religions are alike in his judgment, why does he get under the shelter of one and use its arsenal only to damage its friends? Why not, man fashion, take his opinions outside where he belongs and be an open enemy rather than a foe in the camp?
It's pretty clear from this article. They were saying, you know, you're either with us or you're against us. And if you're going to be against us, go outside, be outside the tent, and don't attack us from within.
So this was a big deal. Again, you have to understand we're out in the middle of the prairie, so maybe it wouldn't have been a big deal if we were New York City. Reverend Tuttle does not like to be questioned in this way. It seems uncollegial to have two Universalists fighting over this sort of thing.
It seems that this beautiful and flourishing city has been enjoying something of a sensation. The Reverend Tuttle examined the relations of religion and science in a series of calm and candid discourses. Mr. Tuttle presented what he deemed the more just and wholesome view. It abates somewhat the gratification with which the Universalists of that region contemplate the work done by Mr. Tuttle, that his nearest ministerial neighbor, the Reverend Herman Bisbee, throws whatever influence he has in the scale against the authority of the Bible and Christianity. It is unfortunate, to say the least, that a man holding such opinions should be a representative of Universalism anywhere.
Yes, he was preaching tenets that were not in widely held belief among the Universalists at the time, but the real thing that got him in trouble, I believe, was that he came into another minister's turf and publicly refuted what that minister had to say. So the Minnesota Universalist Convention in 1872 adopted a resolution that they were withdrawing in fellowship from the Reverend Herman Bisbee. He was charged with unministerial conduct. The specifications under that charge were preaching in a city without the consent of the resident minister of that city, and second, preaching certain sentiments under which it was alleged were contrary to those entertained by the denomination.
Bisbee defended himself eloquently, both praising and questioning the Bible.
By and by it will be as clear as day that we can reject the bad that is found in the Bible without rejecting the good. The good is permanent. The coarse, indecent, and immoral is transient. It must be left behind. The Bible contains the wisdom of centuries. It contains so pure a morality that we may safely walk through every worldly path guided by its light. It contains the absolute religion. I can find a morality in the Brahman New Testament, but I cannot find such love there. I cannot find such religion there, for the great element in religion is the element of love. I do not understand the Minneapolis radical lectures to be a movement against the Bible as a whole, nor against Christ as our leader. I understand that we aim to destroy the dogma of infallibility, and that only.
So Bisbee was not saying we should reject it, but saying that we should keep what is good there, but also look to what is good from other sources.
Bisbee had taken the Liberty Clause to heart in his ministerial duties. Its withdrawal left him vulnerable to the charges against him, but still he did not soften his radical stance.
When I entered the Universalist denomination as a minister, I did so with the understanding that it did not require the acceptance of the Bible as an infallible book. My opinions were well known when I entered the school and when I was ordained. Within a few years, however, I have pushed into prominence a different class of ideas from those which are generally pushed in Universalist churches. I did it chiefly because of the extreme conservative tendencies developed by some leaders in the order. I did not feel that the tendencies were in the right direction or in accordance with the spirit of our faith. So I placed myself in plain and distinct opposition and have since been engaged in aiding to keep the organization on ground which I felt it ought to occupy. I thought I was right. I still hold the same opinion. I say I do not see why the whole liberal element of the country may not work in the same organization and worship in the same temple. I do not see why the Universalist platform is not large enough for all. I am firmly of the opinion, never more so than now, that those who deny to each man the privilege of interpreting the creed for himself and refuse to honor him in such interpretations are the ones who transgress its spirit and take out its lifeblood.
There were three members of the committee who ultimately heard the charges against Bisbee, and they were in fact three men with whom Bisbee had some contentious dealings in the past.
The committee was composed of Moses Goodrich, who Bisbee had attacked in a radical lecture series, Paris Gibson, a member of Tuttle's church, and Captain Russell Blakely from the Universalists' St. Paul Parish.
It's not a dispassionate panel. The fix is in, the jury has already decided before the trial begins, so they find him guilty of heresy.
Resolved, that this convention does withdraw fellowship from the Reverend Herman Bisbee. Adopting this resolution relieves this convention and the Universalist denomination of all responsibility for whatever of error may be taught by the said Reverend Herman Bisbee.
The twist here, though, is that his congregation doesn't think he's guilty of heresy. And so they break away and become the independent Universalists of St. Anthony, which is a very fine and brave thing to do, and Bisbee stays on as their preacher at least for a while, and he preaches even more and more radical sermons.
While Bisbee enjoyed and appreciated the support of his congregation, it was clear that he could no longer expect to draw a crowd from the general population.
Even after he was disfellowshipped, his congregation stuck by him and wanted to keep him on as their minister. And he stayed for a few years, and then he had some health issues, and he went back to Massachusetts, where he went to Harvard Divinity School and became fellowshipped as a Unitarian minister.
Bisbee cites his health. He could be at the end of his intellectual journey here. But there's no one to replace him here, and the congregation dies. Now, I think the Minneapolis Universalists were hoping that these guys would see the light and join up with them, right? That's not the way it happens, because it's pretty nasty what the Minneapolis Universalists have done to the St. Anthony Universalists, so they never join. They sell the church to a French Catholic congregation, and eventually they build another church called the Second Universalist Church. But they never join up with the Minneapolis church.
Even without the support of the St. Anthony Universalists, the Minneapolis Society continued to grow, and in 1876 they dedicated a new church, which was known as Church of the Redeemer. Reverend Tuttle faithfully served his congregation until his retirement in 1893. His assistant, Marion Shutter, was then chosen to lead the Minneapolis Universalists. With the decline of the St. Anthony congregation, Bisbee's time as a pioneer on the frontier had come to an end, but he continued to serve liberal religion as a Unitarian minister until his death in 1879. The Reverend Herman Bisbee had, in a sense, blazed a trail that Universalists would eventually follow, and foreshadowed the union of Unitarians and Universalists.
It's interesting to me that James Tuttle found himself in such open and vigorous conflict with Herman Bisbee over Bisbee's defense of evolution, because Dr. Tuttle's hand-picked successor for First Universalist Church was Marion Shutter, a former Baptist minister who became Tuttle's junior colleague and during the course of his career became one of America's prime advocates of the interface between evolution and theology.
I love to tell the story because I know 'tis true. It satisfies my longings as the